Okay, so I'm going to share the screen, guys, but I do have some slides. Um, the slides also contain links that we might want to discuss today. I put the slides in Slack. We'll try to put them in the chat as well. So let me start sharing. Okay, so I guess I'm sharing now. I'm trying to
Yes,
move.
it's all
And
good.
so I always always a good idea to start with a slide which may in fact not be true. And I'm glad that Ed is here, but I thought I would start with just the way what I think of as what Manifesto is. It's a library. This is the way I look at it. It's JavaScript. Um, but it's sort of compiled or derived from TypeScript. And its purpose is to parse and query the manifest resources in the web browser. And that's the part, maybe Ed can comment on, because I think that it also was intended to have sort of server-side applications, which honestly, at this point, I'm not interested in, but it might be, So, Ed, I don't know whether you have any comment on that or whether it really was just intended for the client side.
Uh, um, you can use it for the server side. I think the term is isomorphic, which means it could be used in either context. And I use it on the server as well,
Yeah.
occasionally.
Okay. So, yeah, and just so we're all clear on this, that the manifesto is not something new with the 3D group. I mean, it's been around for and how many years? Sort of like a decade or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, and I'll show this later, but there is a GitHub site for Manifesto that supports presentation or Prezi 3, I guess is the word we like to use. But most of it I'll give a shout out to that. But what I've been doing, I think of interest to that is adding to that existing work to support what is now our prototype version of a 3D API. And I thought that I just wanted to jump right in, and this is really aimed at people who are preparing demonstrations or webs or of using it in the browser. I just wanted to come out, and I know that seeing code on a PowerPoint slide is not the best thing to do, but the point is just to show that what's needed to get started is really not very much. And I'll defer to Julie to talk about her usage of it in the last week, I believe. But for the developer who is, trying to develop that demonstration in different 3D engines, be they Three.js or X3 DOM in my case, or any other browsers, I guess I'm thinking of it as you really need not very much knowledge of Manifesto. There's sort of two functions right out of the box. Well, first of all, there's the obviously you have to download it from somewhere, and this is the part where I have to admit, whenever I take up a JavaScript project, I'm always like 3 to 5 years out of date. And I really don't understand all this stuff about modules and required. So, but this in fact does work, is that you just download this manifesto.js file the way you download any other JavaScript file. And I defer to others if there's a better way to do it or anything like that. So you just download a JavaScript file called Manifesto, and then I put in green what are the two things that I use to get started. And one is a defined function called load manifest, and that just grabs a URL and downloads it. And then in green, this parse manifest, and that creates and the terminology is confusing. We're calling everything a manifest. But there is a class defined in Manifesto, which embodies, the information in a manifest file, but adds a lot of other useful things. Now, I didn't want to put in a lot of 3D specific code or anything like that. So one useful thing maybe we could all understand that this manifest class does is it provides a useful way to extract the labels, just the text labels in a manifest file. And you're probably aware that the IIIF API supports multiple languages for almost any of these text data can be described in multiple languages. And when you look at the manifest file, it's this set of nested dictionaries supporting the different languages. Manifesto then gives you an easier way to extract the label for any given language, or more about that. So the example I'm demonstrating here is I have a web page and I just want to display somehow on the web page what the label is of this manifest. So I downloaded the manifest, I parsed it, and then first of all, there is oh, sorry, let me go back. That's too early. There's a function, a JavaScript function called getLabel, and it returns this thing, which actually isn't the label yet. And then applying to that, I specify what language I want. And in this case, I want English, and then there's sort of the standard 2-letter designation for English is EN. Now, one of the things that the Manifesto, again, the library, supplies is that there is an algorithm for if that exact language isn't specified, it kind of tries to find the next best thing. So for example, if I believe it works this way, if I have specified it in my manifest file as English-US, and you say you want English-GB for Great Britain, it'll give you it'll give you the US as the next best thing, whether you agree with that or not. So what I put here is, I mean, this is just a simple thing, just getting a labeled text. But at this point, and that is where the real fun begins, depending on your what rendering engine is, this is the place in which you code I'm sorry, I did that again. This is the place in your code at which you would create your 3D scene. So I use exactly this pattern in my code sandbox for X3 DOM. And is it at this point where I have a lot of JavaScript, which creates inlines and lights and all that kind of thing based on what's in the manifest. And I'll let Julie describe what she does, but I looked at it briefly. At a similar point in her code, she makes a lot of calls to 3JS. And that's basically the way it works. The last step here, this catch, because if you're familiar with doing stuff on the net, the original call to manifest to fetch that URL, because the way the world works, sometimes that just doesn't work at all. I mean, you never get the thing back. So that last step is just the simplest thing to do. If one of the other steps above it fails, in this case, I'm just printing into the JavaScript console. But in a real world viewer, you'd probably want to alert the viewer that something bad happened. Bad luck. So I could not, I mean, of course, this is a slide, but I put this code and this simple example in as a real simple code sandbox. The link is in that PowerPoint slide, which is now in code sandbox, excuse me, now in Slack. I'll open this just to, open this sandbox. Okay, so in the okay, I'm kind of demonstrating this. So this is the kind of thing, if you wanted to step through this with the debugger or not.
Oh, Vince, I
Yes?
think maybe whether we're still seeing the slide.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
no worries.
right. I did the thing with the share screen. You're right.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. And also, I think maybe that repository, not for now, but maybe that repository is private.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well, then I will show it on my browser. I mean, I'm seeing
Yeah.
it, you can't see it. That's the problem. Okay, I will fix that afterwards. Didn't realize I'd done that. Okay, so I need to share the other screen. Sorry.
No worries.
Nice to have a break anyway.
Yeah.
I'll just
And
share.
this is all great so far.
Excellent.
Okay, so now you see it, and the real simple thing is, you know, I have this manifest URL, and it's one that's in my own GitHub repository because I added separate languages for the code label. So when I just load the standard version, which is I want the English, I click the load manifest and says, hey, the label for this astronaut is astronaut. I have two other languages specified for the possible label. I leave that as an exercise for you on your own to try to guess what those languages are, or look in you can actually look in the manifest itself, and you'll see the language is clearly labeled. But using Code Sandbox, once it's public, you can change that EN to one of the other languages, and you should see the label in other languages. The other thing I put in here, and I'll talk a little bit about this, we only have 3 slides left before we end, is one thing that's in that Manifesto GitHub is the it's documentation, which is auto-generated from comments. So, obviously, in most of these projects, the documentation gets short shrift until there are complaints about it. But I did in this Code Sandbox give some links. So for example, if I wanted to do more for a manifest than just extract the label, go to there and we see this automatically generated, the different properties and methods that are part of the Manifesto class. So at some point, we may want to go into more detail, but for example, if I can remember one of the, do I have the get scene? I thought I had manifest get scenes. I was sure that there was oh, you know what? I bet I did not, again, I did not properly document my get scenes. There is in the new manifesto, there is a property of the manifest class which just returns all the scenes in the manifest. And in most of our manifests, our prototypes, there's just one. But I know eventually the manifest can support, as we talked about, multiple scenes, multiple canvases, and I will put that as something I need to do, is add that document. Let me go back to the.
Yeah, I think you had it built out where at least I'm getting the scenes from the sequences. So you go like manifest,
Yes.
get sequences, and then get scenes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think I combine those. Yes.
Cool.
And I will say this, that there, and probably Ed knows more, several people know more about this, but the presentation 3 has a lot of structure, for collections and several scenes, several canvases. And I don't understand, I don't really know them yet, but like you said, there's sequences, there's ranges, there's pages of annotations. All that stuff. I'm kind of assuming that most of that stuff will just be analogous in the 3D world. It won't be noticeably different, but so far, the support for whatever multiple sequences of scenes is not there.
Right.
It's just one scene. since, we've talked about the different GitHub, I thought this would be useful to just, kind of summarize where we are in terms of the different projects going on. As I mentioned, there's the existing version of Manifesto, which supports presentation API 3, and that's in the GitHub for the IIIF Commons. They're called authors or groups. They've got a lot of projects there, repositories, but the one is Manifesto. I kind of forked off, that's the GitHub term. This worked for the 3D. I didn't put the dates, but this was sometime in early February, right after our meeting in Washington, DC. The reason I wanted to note these dashed lines was and I noticed it was in the discussion earlier today. It's not just the 3D, but there's, talk about, presentation version 4 and all those things. I'm assuming that would, at some point Manifesto will be updated to support that new work. And, this is what GitHub was invented for, was, they are going to update Manifesto for any changes for 2D and audio visual. We'll continue the 3D work. And at some appropriate time, we'll have to merge those all together. And they say that's why that's why there's a GitHub for exactly that kind of thing. And I noticed yesterday, as I was working at the Ohio elections, that I got with a text message from Julie that she had created a fork of my fork to support distributing the library for the demo she did. So the real point of this slide, and we don't need to do this today because it's a fairly small group working on this stuff, but at some point we may want to consolidate these different forks, maybe even have our own, our own group, so that we don't have to remember, hey, is this something on Vincent's repository, is this something on Julie's? We could have we can consolidate some of this work in one set of branches. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Oh, well, I misspelled GitHub. Just to point out the other kind of resources that are in these Manifesto repositories, and this is really aimed at people who are not so much interested. I mean, as I envisioned, there are kind of two groups of people, or the same people doing two different tasks. One is to use Manifesto to develop their demos, their web pages, and so on. So they'll just assume that the Manifesto it's ready to go, and when they find out when it's not, they will submit issues to the GitHub issues. This doesn't work. This could be better, and so on. Through the GitHub issues forums. And then there's the second activity, which is actually developing the TypeScript code for Manifesto as our 3D API matures. So in that repository, I mentioned that there is a folder and a whole bunch of code for developing that documentation. And yeah, that's something which we have to develop the documentation to make it more useful, again, for the website developers. There's also a folder for and a system of scripts for, if you're familiar with the term unit testing, it's a sort of a development discipline where, rather than wait until you put your JavaScript in a web page to see what goes wrong, there's a method and a whole kind of framework for testing one individual feature at a time. The original Manifesto has I guess something like 200 tests already existing, where they download a wide variety of test manifests and then show, do we accurately retrieve the label? Do we accurately retrieve the sequences? So I've kind of built on that with the same with our test of manifest, our 3D test. Does it accurately, do I accurately retrieve the angles of the rotate transform? Do I accurately retrieve this, different features? So as our API and our examples develop, add to those unit tests. It's a lot easier than just waiting until everything is in a web page and then have a blank screen trying to see what went on. And again, this is where, again, I mentioned being 3 or more years out of date. There's quite a bit of support in the Manifesto GitHub for supporting different module systems. I know what a JavaScript module system is, and that is the exact extent of my knowledge. So perhaps Ed or Julie can, if there's something useful to know about the different modules, let us know or let me know. I will say that Julie mentioned that, she had also developed an example using the Manifesto library. And going back to this original slide where I said my pattern, I know that she uses a kind of a different pattern. And I believe the reason is you want to support not just retrieving a URL, but also retrieving a manifest from a text box. So, if you go to her example, or maybe she'll discuss it, it's not exactly this, but it's kind of an outgrowth of this. And let's see, did this. And the last, again, this was, when I'll put it in a new version of slides with that typo fixed it, but these are the links for GitHub for the, again, the 3 different forks we have. The original, the one I've developed, and then, Julie's development of that for distribution. And again, another example of where I am is the people want to use it. They sort of have 2 options. One is to go to that try Manifesto demo I put on from Code Sandbox, and you can just pull down manifesto.js. I know that Julie has actually put the compiled manifesto.js in her GitHub, and so that's another way to get it. But I do know that there's also ways, and I know that Ed has done this. You can actually put this stuff as a downloadable NPM package. And I know it's easy, but I don't know how to do it yet. So that's another thing that can help our web developers right off is to set up that distribution. But that's what I've got open for questions, discussion, and maybe Julie's ready to show what her variant of this.
Yeah, I wanna wait for questions, but yeah, I think what I have follows up really nicely to this. But yeah, does anybody have any questions?
Well, first of all, thanks. Brilliant stuff. And actually, it's a testimony too to piecing these various things together and being available for different skill sets. It was nice how you outlined that in one of the earlier slides, because this will make it easier for adoption later on.
Yeah.
And I think you implied this, but just to be clear, effectively, we will be generating Prezi 4.0, which will be inclusive of the 3D work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know how extensive or whether there be any collisions between changes for Prezi 4 for the 2 AV stuff. And that I don't think there'll be much because we're using a different term, scene, and then we have
I did wonder. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, when you look, if you do look, you'll see that in many ways I've defined a bunch of different classes. There's a transform class, there is a light class, there is a camera class, which I don't think there's an analog in the 2D API. So we're not going to have collisions between, I hope.
So I did wonder in future use of this, Do you need to tell Manifesto what level of Prezi you're using?
Oh,
Or will it effectively auto detect that or just
well,
adjust? I,
that I know from experience that's a big question, is how much you want to support backward so I can't answer that now.
yeah, no, thanks. Sorry, anyone else want to jump in?
I mean, that is one of the goals of the library, to be backwards compatible all the way back. It was one of the nice things about the library, because it's so old. It's got a lot of tests in it,
Yeah.
and yeah, definitely great to add more tests, and that gives you a lot of confidence using it, I think.
Yeah,
And so, part of the discipline of that is I very periodically with the code I have run all those 200 some odd tests to kind of, I haven't broken anything that was working before.
wow, that's a great testimony. And Ed, I remember you waxing lyrically about some of this in Göttingen,
Yeah.
Germany, and it's good to see it continue to evolve. But sorry,
Yeah, I mean, it's used by UV and Mirador, this library. So, it's heavily used by the IIIF community. So fantastic to see more work going into it, and moving forwards.
brilliant. Julia, you want to take on?
Sure. Yeah.
I will stop sharing so
Okay.
someone else can share.
Yeah, and I will also share, though I'm going to pick up from basically that slide with the different repositories, and I'll talk a little bit about the demo, but yeah, I'm also I think it's good that we're having the conversation about workflow stuff, because I think we could probably address some of that. But yeah, which I don't have nice slides. I'm just going to show a lot of GitHub pages and code, so apologies to everyone. But so yeah, so here's the IIIF Commons Manifesto. And yeah, so I knew Vince was going to talk about Manifesto during this week, and I had a little bit of time the last couple of days. So, since I knew he had already sort of put it into practice, I wanted to see, yeah, Vince, how you were doing it and how I could sort of work and adapt that work. And yeah, so I went through your demos and I saw, right, that you had created this fork of your version of Manifesto, where you've added like lots of new code to support the 3D things that we're talking about adding to the spec for Prezi 4, which I thought it was awesome. But I am lazy. I'm the kind of lazy that means that I do a lot more work than I need. And what I mean by that is, because yeah, Vince, I know that in your demo, I think you went for the most efficient route, which is just putting all of this code in with the code sandbox, because then it's accessible. And I was like, oh, but that's so many files. How do I import it? Because that's the thing, I wanted to be able to import it as a module. And that's the only reason why I produced this fork. And it was because I just wanted to, yeah, so this is my fork of this branch, the 3D TSG dev. It's identical to what Vince has up. Yeah, and I just made a separate branch where I just built it. I just added like the distributable versions of the files, because that means that I can now use npm to pull this repository as a module down. So that's the only reason why I did that. And I will say, yeah, the alternatives to this, I think actually, Ed, if you were amenable to this, what would probably make a lot of sense, if you were willing to let some of us muck around in the Manifesto repo, maybe we could set up like a Prezi 4 0.0.1 branch, and then like we could keep that work over there, and then maybe even push that up to npm as like a not the latest version. I know npm has an ability to do that, but as like a pre-release version, so that people could just pull stuff from npm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, because that way we could also all of us as a group could work on like PRs and flagging issues in the main manifesto repo, because there were like a couple bugs that I noticed. All right, but so yeah, so I had the previous version, just like the very simple 3JS demo, and I wanted to push that forward. Which, can I make text bigger? I can. Good. Yeah, and I linked this in the 3D Slack, but this is really just to point out that in the in the like node npm sort of package description, I am now able just include manifesto.js as a dependency, pointing it at my distribution version on GitHub. So similarly, anyone else that's using like Webpack or Parcel or any sort of other bundler for like npm, or I think even if you're just using straight up npm dependencies for your JavaScript project, you should be able to just pull this in. And yeah, hopefully we can get it up on npm as like a real thing on manifesto.js. But yeah, and indeed, Vince pointed out sort of a small difference between where am I looking for? Between what he does and what I did is, yeah, so I wanted to be able to load a manifest from a URL, and this drop-down list is just loading different manifests from URLs. It's like if you've ever seen the Universal Viewer demo page, it's pretty similar to that. But I also wanted to be able to load manifest from text. So yeah, this is the single model manifest itself. It's describing a scene, and then it is annotating a model annotation into that scene. But yeah, so it's pretty similar. I'm just checking, is it a JSON string? If it's already JSON, we don't need the load manifest function that Vince mentioned. We just need manifesto parse manifest. Otherwise, we just set a URL, and then we use the manifesto load manifest there to get the JSON, then we parse it. And then we get various things. And then, yeah, and then there's like a bunch of calling. Where is it? Yeah, it's a bunch of, yeah, whereas Vince has a lot of code calling X3D stuff, this has a lot of code calling 3JS things. It's adding a default light, it's adding blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of things that are interesting about this, or things that are worth mentioning, I should say. Oh yeah, compared to before, I colored the axes, so you can now see where the X, Y, and Z axes are coming out. I had to sort of play with the transforms a little bit, because I do have at least translate and scale transforms placed in. So if I go to the scaled translated model with the original for comparison, yeah, so we have the original, which has been placed at -1 on the X and 0 everywhere else. And then we have another one which has been first. So it is first translated to basically to like +2 on every axis. So it's, if you can see my mouse, it's like here on the grid. It's, +2x, +2z, and then it's like up, actually, it's like +2y. And then it's scaled by 2, which in addition to, you can see it's bigger. It makes the astronaut bigger, but because we have specified that our scale translation applies to the local coordinate space, not just the thing, it's like if you move a thing off of the origin and then you scale it, it ends up at twice the distance from the origin that it started if you're scaling by 2. That's a consequence of how we have specified the translations. And then it is actually placed at like X -1 or something like that, which all that means is it should be at, if you think in a 2D context, it should be at 4, 4, but we've placed it at +1 on the X, so it ends up at 5, 4, basically. I can, if it's really important, I can walk. I don't want to like just throw numbers at people that are not good to talk about. They're not very well understandable when just spoken about. But I can walk through that translation if people think it is helpful.
you mind to interject?
Yeah.
So the implication is because of the order, translate first, rotate second, scale.
Yep.
The scale then has a knock-on effect even for the translation positioning.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's all positioning from the feet or the center.
Yes, so it's actually really nice with this model. You can see exactly where, so it's
Yeah.
the origin of the model is exactly between the feet, and
Yeah.
on the side, it's where this vertical line is in the boot.
Sure.
That's where the 0 point is.
Yeah.
And it's a bit hard to tell because everything is there's like perspective, it's not orthogonal,
Yeah.
but the astronaut is on this line, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4 in the Z, and if I go over here, it'll be 5 on the X, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I line it
So
up.
just another aside, apart from getting used to this behavior in 3JS, key question will be, does it do similarly in X3D world and Babylon JS world, for instance?
Well, this is actually the thing, and it's there are different ways of talking through transforms.
Yeah.
This is, it's sort of, we have it defined in the draft spec document that this is how the transforms work. And so in order to conform to the draft spec document, it would have to, like, this isn't because of 3JS.
Right.
Every framework would have to conform to this. And in fact, that's one of the things I wanted to point out. You have to jump through because what we're doing basically is we're saying, take the model, do the first transform on its local coordinate space, and then basically apply that transformation. So we're saying, take the model, if we want to move it 2 to the right and 2 forward, we then want to apply that to the space. So if we scale that whole space doubled, then it moves it, it ends up at 4, 4, basically. It ends up, everything ends up doubled because you've applied the transformation. There are other ways of thinking. You could think about it as, well, I want to translate it, and then I don't want to worry, I just want to like scale the thing itself. I don't want to scale the coordinate space.
Yeah.
Which that's actually more native to what 3JS does. What I ended up doing in order to get the transformations to work in 3JS is I sort of have had to build like a nested set of groups in order to apply the, it's like Matryoshka dolls, you know, where there's like a smaller one inside of each of the others. So it's basically you know, in the code it's defining this concept of a model, but when you find a transformation, what it does is it applies the transformation to the original model, and then it puts that model inside a new group container. And so it's like you take the smallest Matryoshka doll, you apply your transformation to it, then you put it inside a bigger doll, and when you scale the bigger doll. You don't scale the thing inside. You scale the group that it's sitting in. And then if you need to then rotate that, you put it in a bigger group and you scale that bigger group. And then when you need to put those in a 3D scene, you are putting the largest group into the scene. Because in 3JS, that has the effect of effectively applying your transformations in a way where they can impact each other.
No, thanks for that. And the suggestion that running this in other environments should amount to the same, which will be good to verify.
Yeah, and let me, does it?
In time, in due course.
Yeah, well, there was I'm trying to see. Yeah, so, because when in the editors meeting after the DC working group, when we came up with this manifest, we did work through like what the expected final position is, and it is included here. So you can see, you know, viewer should render the model twice, once at normal scale and once at double scale after moving in the local coordinate space. Thus, the model, by that the transformed model, will end up at 544 due to the doubling of the scale. So we have in here sort of what the final position should be. Yeah, because that's that helps you sort of know what the order of the translations is. But
Thanks. Yeah.
yeah, and there's other ways of doing it, but this definitely works. I think that's probably about it. Yeah, I mean, like this, you know, it can handle multiple models. It can handle the background color. What a horrible background color for this, but it's just eye searing to look at it for any length of time.
That's for the high vis hazard areas.
Yeah. But yeah,